Welcome to everyone who joins. I know that we've got the call started and people are streaming in from the waiting area, the virtual waiting area. And so I'd just like to welcome everyone as they're joining. I know it takes a few seconds for the audio to start working. So we'll wait just another 30 seconds or so to make sure that everybody who's attempting to join the call is tuned in and got their sound on and everything. So we'll get started in just a minute here. Just a second, actually. I think we're probably just about ready to go. Iser? Think so? All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Amy Cartmel, and Jane Gallagher and I are the co-leaders of the Maine chapter of American Promise. With the goal of getting big money out of politics, American Promise is leading a nationwide cross-partisan effort to pass an amendment to the US Constitution in order to give a voice back to individuals so that we, the people, not big money, corporations, unions, and super PACs are in charge of our democracy again. In Maine, we've launched the Stand With Maine campaign in order to bring attention to the resolution passed by the Maine legislature in 2013 that supports an amendment to the US Constitution regarding campaign finance and calls for members of the Maine congressional delegation to promote such an amendment in Congress. This resolution was passed through the cross-partisan effort of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans in the Maine legislature at the time, including Republican Roger Cates and Independent Dick Woodbury, who are on tonight's call, along with Democrat John Brodigan, who served in the Maine legislature prior to the resolution's passing. We'll introduce Roger, Dick, and John in just a minute, but first we'll hear from American Promise research intern and Maine chapter member, Aidan Nickel, on why we think tonight's discussion is so important. Aidan?
All right, so like Amy said, my name's Aidan Nickel. I'm an intern at American Promise and a student at Bowdoin College. And I want to take a minute just to talk about why we're doing this call in particular right now. As a state, as a country, we've been through a lot in the past few months. Alongside a raging pandemic, we saw our Senate race turn not only towards personal attacks and misleading ads, but away from the issues that actually matter for the state. And even in the final weeks of the race, I was always shocked by how often I heard people say, I don't know what these candidates stand for. All they ever do is attack each other. And then after the election, we saw huge numbers of people losing faith in the democratic process. We saw violence erupt and norms and institutions shattered. And for me, the scariest thing about all of this was how little power I felt like I had to fight it. The negativity and the fear-mongering in the Senate race weren't used to win us over or to persuade us with reason. They aimed to manipulate us. And these ugly tactics were largely employed not by the candidates themselves, but by out-of-state super PACs and dark money groups who could care less that they're drowning out the voices of Mainers. And this feeling of powerlessness grew even larger when, in response to the Capitol riots, you had corporations like Morgan Stanley, Dow Chemical, and Facebook announce that they were withholding their typical campaign contributions. So rather than reducing their influence, this move made me feel as though they were simply dangling a carrot in front of our elected leaders to try to win back their power. So we're having this call tonight because I think a lot of us are sharing this feeling of powerlessness. But when a whole lot of people feel powerless altogether, I think that can be pretty powerful. So I'm hopeful that Mainers can put aside their divisions and partisanship fueled by negative ads and stand together in the face of unchecked political spending. Given what we've just been through, we have an amazing opportunity to turn our frustration into action and to take back the power of our votes. So I'm really excited tonight to hear from Roger and Dick and John, not only about the problems that we're facing in our democracy right now, but also about their hopes for the future.
Thanks so much, Aiden. We're hopeful for the future based on the fact that there are college students that are pitching in and interested in making sure our democracy is works for everyone. So now Jane will introduce the panelists for tonight.
Okay. So in case any of you out there don't know our three esteemed panelists, we thought it would be helpful to share a little bit of information to give you a context for this discussion. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about each of them. Roger Cates is a Republican former state senator from Maine's 15th district, representing Augusta, China, Oakland, Sydney, and Vassalboro. Roger was first elected to the Maine State Senate in 2010 after serving from 2006 through 2010 as the mayor of our state capital, Augusta. Roger is an integral part of our Maine American Promise chapter, and we are so grateful for his leadership. Dick Woodbury is an economist and former state legislator who served 10 years as an independent, including terms in both the Maine House and the Maine State Senate. He was a lead sponsor of the resolution you just heard about, calling for a constitutional amendment to limit campaign spending passed by the Maine legislature in 2013. More recently, Dick chaired the ranked choice voting referendum campaign. And John Brodigham is a former state legislator and is currently an attorney with a practice in public policy, election law, and legislative advocacy. While in the legislature, John was House Chairman of the Insurance and Financial Services Committee, and John served as an Assistant Attorney General of Maine from 2000 through 2004, litigating issues relating to prescription drug access and benefits. John is currently counsel and senior policy advisor to the League of Women Voters of Maine and Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. So that's a little bit of background, and now I'll turn it back to Amy to take this discussion and run with it.
Great, thanks, Jane. Well, we have a series of questions that we're hoping will allow the panelists to get right to the heart of the matter. And I'll be asking these questions, starting directing each one towards one particular panelist and then giving time for the others to jump in as well if desired. So the first question is, what issues were you thinking about when you ran for office at the state level? And how did money in politics impact your campaigns and the issues you worked on after elected? Roger, would you mind starting here?
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Amy, and thanks to you and Jane and Aiden and Azar for putting this together. I'm happy to participate, particularly because Dick and John are on, who I both know very well. And they're the two smartest people in the room tonight, that's for sure. When I ran for office, I'd been mayor of Augusta, and I was interested in legislation that was going to affect my community. It was going to affect service center communities in Maine. And off I went on my campaign. And I was running against a woman named Patsy Crockett, who was a sitting state representative. And we were having a very respectful campaign with sort of different visions of where we ought to go. To overgeneralize, Patsy a little more liberal, me a little more conservative, but very respectful. And I'll never forget the day, I was literally at a funeral. I got a call from the woman who was running the Republican Senate campaigns. And she said, I just found out about this, but the Republican State Leadership Conference just dumped about $30,000 into your race to try to help you. And the ads that they were running were very negative about my opponent and saying things about her that I would not say and criticizing her for voting for things, some of which, frankly, I supported. And it took a race where we were talking about what the local issues we wanted to talk about. And all of a sudden, money was coming in from corporations from out of state to try to get me elected that I'd had no contact with, didn't want their help, and didn't agree with half of what they said. That was followed by a counter barrage of money against me from my opponent, from the Democratic side, mostly from unions, also saying mean things about me, not why they should vote for her, but why they should vote against me. And the respectful, and I think good dialogue we were having was completely avalanched, if you will, by this outside money that changed the conversation and took the debate away from my opponent and me and put it in the hands of these to overgeneralize corporations versus unions. And I'm really overgeneralizing. That was my first taste of big money in politics. And it's certainly stayed with me ever since, Amy.
That sounds so frustrating. Oh my gosh. Dick or John, would you want to take a stab at that question as well?
I think my first campaign among the three of us was the earliest. So if we're sort of thinking about a contrast between the good old days and what things look like today, I maybe could share a little bit about that. I first ran in 2002, so almost 20 years ago. And I think I'd call it the heyday of Maine's clean election system, because the majority of candidates, Republican, Democrat, Independent, used the system. So you really felt like you had a level playing field. There was, a little bit of third-party spending, like what Roger described in his first campaign, but really not very much. And so you really felt like you were running the kind of issues-based, respectful kind of campaign that Roger started out as, and mine felt like it was that way the whole way through. And what I really liked about that balanced, level playing field, clean election approach is that, first of all, anyone could run, regardless of means, regardless of, your connections and your ability to kind of raise money privately. So very democratic feeling in that sense. Probably for somebody like me who did this as an independent without a party, it was even more helpful because, those running with parties have some automatic connections to potential donors. I didn't, though I probably came from a community that it would have worked all right. But overall, it was a really rewarding civil experience. And I, kind of personal anecdote. I remember my first time standing at the polls with, my opponent standing next to me, and we're greeting the people as they come by. And it really felt much more like camaraderie than opposition, in a way that we'd both just been through a process of talking to lots of people and knocking on doors and showing up at forums together. And now we were hanging out together at the polls, watching our community walk by, and we all went out to lunch together, actually the House candidates and the Senate candidates, and it was very pleasant. And so that kind of is what I feel is a pretty strong contrast with how things have changed since.
That does seem like a contrast. It's hard to imagine these days a lot of people from different political parties going, out to lunch together with how divisive it is right now.
I
John,
would
do
just
you want to
very
jump?
briefly just say that my first race was a very close race. I actually had a recount. I ended up having a recount, but during the race, I had carefully planned out my budget and my 4 mailings, I think it was, that I was going to do, and spaced them out several weeks and thought about what I was going to say in my mailings. And then in the last few weeks of the campaign, every day when I got home from doing doors, my mailbox would be stuffed with different things, with my picture on it, with my opponent's picture on it, all kinds of things that I had no idea were happening, and some of which were very unfortunate and unhelpful. And I had people complain to me constantly, if you ever send me one more thing, I'm not going to vote for you. And it was like, it wasn't me. It was coming from groups that had no connection to our district. It was quite frustrating experience. I think everybody obviously has a right to weigh in on campaigns, but the avalanche of information coming from somebody really out of state money on both sides really distorted the campaign, and it was regrettable.
Yeah, that sounds unfortunate. Thank you all. We'll move on to the second question, and that is, the Collins-Gideon race smashed all records for political spending in Maine. What do you see as the long-term consequences of that kind of money in our democracy? Dick, would you be able to speak to that?
I'll try. I mean, I think it's fundamentally changed, both, the nature of what campaigns look like, but also the nature of politics and policymaking more broadly. And maybe just, I don't know, I've thought of a couple of, potential categories of implications, but I think it's fundamentally changed the job, particularly at higher levels like Susan Collins' level, of what you do in the job. That rather than being able to really devote your thoughtful energies to policy development and the like, you got to spend serious amounts of time fundraising, throughout the year, all the time, and I think that's really harmed the approach to policymaking. One thing Roger mentioned in his campaign that I definitely felt in mine, and I'm sure was is true in Susan Collins and Sarah Gideon's race, is when there's so much spending by people that aren't the candidate themselves, it becomes a situation where other people are in many ways defining who you are rather than you defining for yourself, how you present yourself and what you think about. That troubled me in, even in my later races when third-party spending would, even spending to support me, would be characterizing me in ways that I really didn't think of myself being characterized. And I think the level that it's reached today has, there are lots of causes, but I think the level that it's reached today has drastically accelerated the negativity of what campaigns look like. Trying to think of the word, the devolution to misleading information, lying in some cases as becoming almost normalized as part of what politics is, and it's ugly. And so I'm pretty discouraged with where politics is reached, and money is just one of the things that are a problem, but it's certainly a very significant part of that problem.
Sure. Thank you. John or Roger?
I would say, after January 6th, I think there was a sense that a lot of people had kind of given up on our experiment in democracy. And it's very difficult to say what role money in politics might have, whether it's kind of a co-occurring symptom or whether it's actually a causation. But I think it erodes the fabric of our democracy and interferes with our dialogue that's at the center of politics and making democratic decisions. And I think there's just no question about that. And we'll have to see where this all goes. But I've seen it, and in the state level as well as the national level, and it's as bad as it's ever been.
Let me just add just 3 points, and I'm going to piggyback on what they both just said. The fundraising thing really disturbs me. I remember it was about 10 years ago, and one of my partners was head of the Maine Trialers Association, and he got a call one afternoon from a U.S. senator from Mississippi raising money. And it really struck me. I mean, he was being called because he was head of the Trialers Association, an organization that traditionally gives to Democratic candidates. So what is this United States senator spending his Wednesday afternoon calling a lawyer from Maine to try to raise money? And as I've learned more, it's something like, 30-35% literally of their time is spent on call lists that their staff prepare for them. that just takes away from what we want them to be doing, which is studying and making good public policy, right? Secondly, talking about the Collins race, Collins and Gideon race, everybody was turned off by it, right? I mean, it was just awful, and it makes people even more cynical about politics. And third, I mean, here in Maine in particular, part of the reason that so much money piled in here compared to the size of our state is where the cheap date, right? I mean, a Senate seat from Maine is worth every as much as a Senate seat from New York or California. So again, as happened on a very minor scale in my race, the terms of the debate got taken away from Maine people and got placed in with large donors, with the Koch brothers and the George Soroses of the world on either side, defining the debate about who we were going to elect. And that's really offensive. And all of this, as I think John has said, it really degrades people's faith in our democracy, and it should. So hopefully we can change it.
Yeah, we've heard from so many people that that the Senate race and the out-of-state money pouring in was the thing that really caused them to start paying attention to this issue. Thanks, Roger. The third question is, how did you react to the withdrawal by corporations of political donations and PAC money, some specific to particular candidates and some across the board? Do you see this as part of the solution or part of the system that is rigged? John?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fascinating thing to see, and my reaction was very mixed. It was a unique moment in our politics. I don't think ever before in our history has a group of corporations decided to withhold political funding at one time. It's a big statement. What it actually means, I'm not entirely clear. Some of these companies decided to completely step back from giving anything, and others, like I think Marriott and MasterCard specifically targeted the 147 members of Congress who voted for not to certify the election. So I had a mixed feeling about it. Part of me kind of cheered, and part of me hoped that it would move in the direction of re-examining the bigger issues here. But part of me felt like, God, this is just like one particular example of using large amounts of money to try to influence an outcome that I actually don't really like, even though in this particular case I was completely sympathetic to it. So I had really mixed feelings about it. I don't think it signals a time when, it's going to reverse the trend of money in politics at all. We'll have to see how it plays out. I think fixing these problems will take a lot more than even a large number of companies deciding to withhold funds from certain members. And I would also point out that, they didn't necessarily say that they're not going to give money to the super PACs, which in turn are playing a larger and larger role. They really just said not giving directly to these candidates, and that's not really even the largest problem. So I think it remains to be seen how it'll play out, but I don't think it's a solution.
That's an interesting point you make about the super PACs. Yeah. Dick or Roger?
I'll jump in. I guess I'm getting a little cynical as I get older, and I had the same reaction John did, an immediate positive reaction that they were standing up for democracy. But they were standing up for democracy at a time when they were withholding contributions that they wouldn't be making anyway. This is not campaign or PAC giving season right after an election. This is pretty slow time. And I think they were sending a message, which I agree with, which is we want stability and predictability in our elections, and they certainly do as corporations. But the proof's going to be in the pudding, and we'll just have to see as time goes on what their giving history is, not only directly, as John said, but to PACs. I suspect that they'll be right back at it because ultimately they are going to donate money, as are labor unions, as are wealthy donors, individuals, to candidates and causes that they personally want, and they give money so they can, again, try to affect the debate in oversized ways. And that, I think we all agree, is not a good thing, but really interesting to see.
I agree. I don't have a lot to add. I think it's at least symbolically good, but the amount of money just in and around politics, lobbyists and the like, is just so enormous these days that I too feel fairly cynical about where we are.
I guess only time will tell, but I'm afraid you're all likely right. Next question. Let's see. Why do we need a constitutional amendment? Can't we just work harder to get the Supreme Court to overturn its decision in Citizens United and Speech Now and their progeny? John?
Well, I have a two-part answer to that. One is a constitutional amendment and the campaign to enact a constitutional amendment can really be transformative for our political culture. I think it engenders a public debate and discussion about who really owns our democracy. And this is the kind of issue that is so core and fundamental that, incorporating it into the blueprint of our democracy is actually very appropriate. And it belongs there along with the fundamental statements in the Bill of Rights and other parts of the Constitution that are just, part of our deep DNA as a country. So there can be a very positive benefit to a constitutional amendment campaign, and particularly where there seems to be a growing consensus that absolutely something has to change here, and it has to be profound and effective change. The flip side is that courts don't like to reverse themselves. Roger will confirm that even when there's an ideological disagreement, a reversal of a court in a few 10-year period of time diminishes the power of the court, and the courts just don't like to go back on a decision like Speech Now or Citizens United. The doctrine of stare decisis is all about preserving precedent, respecting precedent, and not departing from it unless it's manifestly something has changed, or there's just a rare occurrence of some kind of error or mistake. And the tools for working on the court to try to persuade the court are limited. The court doesn't respond very well to public pressure. Before Brown versus Board of Education in the 1950s, there was a 2-decade campaign of attorneys who worked together and incrementally made inroads on the separate but equal idea. And eventually it was one of those rare shining moments when they were able to reverse a Supreme Court decision. The Brown versus Board of Education decision was a hallmark, but it is one of those extremely rare moments. It took them, it was 100 years, between the Plessy v. Ferguson separate but equal decision and the Brown versus Board of Education decision. So it is extremely difficult, and I'd like to see something happen in my lifetime. That's what it comes down to. It's my thoughts.
Seems like based on that timeline, we'd have another 90 years to go. Yeah.
Right.
Roger or Dick?
Dick, you want to go ahead?
I don't immediately have anything to add. I guess what I'd say is the system's a lot more seriously broken than I just ever would have imagined. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll say even 4 years ago, but I'm not obviously indicative of itself of what I'm thinking about. But I don't think this is going to be addressed very easily and thoroughly without some reinterpretation, so some changes to the Constitution. And I think the whole process of getting from here to there could engage the country in a larger debate that is really helpful to at least beginning to fix some of our, most troubling aspects of what politics has become.
Yeah, I would just add that the question, can't we just work harder to get the Supreme Court to overturn the Citizens United? I mean, I think that question is in part indirectly pointing out a problem. The court isn't supposed to be capable of being lobbied or pressured into its decisions. And if you watch the Kavanaugh hearings or the Neil Gorsuch hearings, you'll recall that there was tens or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars spent on television ads attempting to affect the decision of the Senate on who was going to get appointed. You'd think that these judges were running for office, for God's sake. And the independence of the judiciary is something which has been eroded in recent years, I think much to the detriment of our democracy. So yeah, I mean, elections have consequences and presidents can appoint judges of various perspectives. That's the way it's supposed to work. But the idea that a particular nominee, it's a political event, I suppose to a certain extent that's always been true, but it's been elevated now to political campaigns. The way to do it, like I think Dick said, is to amend the Constitution. If the Supreme Court says this is unconstitutional, then it can be changed, and it has over time. We decided that prohibition was a lousy idea, and so we amended the Constitution to say that we can go into a bar and buy a beer. So it can be done, and there's a pathway to do it. And I think, as we'll probably talk about more, I think this ought to be an issue where there can be and ought to be bipartisan support for it.
We certainly agree. And I'll just mention quickly that sometimes at American Promise, we refer to the amendment we're working towards as the 28th Amendment, because there are 27 so far. But we also recognize the fact that there are other issues that could beat us to the punch, including ERA. So if we refer to it more generically, that's the reason why. Great. Well, thank you. Let's see. The next question is, along with a Republican and a Democrat, you led the effort to pass the 2013 resolution, and this will be for Dick, supporting a constitutional amendment to allow reasonable limits on political spending. What were you seeing then that inspired you to lead that effort? And did you at that point foresee what we're now experiencing? So I know that you've already touched on that, Dick, but if you've got anything to add there.
Well, I didn't in my wildest imaginations foresee what things have become now. So what was this, 8 years ago we're talking about? But I think the direction of change was, toward where we've come. And the direction of change was the amount being spent on campaigns was rising fairly rapidly from what it had been. There was a reweighting of where that spending was coming from, so that proportionally less was coming from candidates, candidate campaigns themselves. Proportionally more was coming from third parties that were creating negativity and redefining candidates in ways that tainted campaigns. While there were always party divisions, the divisiveness in which the parties seem to interact with each other in the political system was just beginning to become more divisive and more negative. So, all of those things that we've seen so profoundly worse now, you sort of saw them coming. And so after the Citizens United decision, it seemed natural to, the only way to kind of, force a change in how the Constitution was being interpreted was to propose an amendment. So I was kind of happy to lead that effort. I guess I just reiterate again the degree to which, if it was important then, it is so profoundly more important now, because what those trends have foretold to I don't know led into is a situation today which is so dramatically worse for politics that the need today is that much greater. And why I'm so appreciative of the work that American Promise is doing to try to really make this happen.
Great, thanks. And Roger, you were in the legislature at that time as well.
I was, and I certainly voted for this, but let me ask Dick a question. I don't recall this being even terribly controversial at the time. Am I remembering that right?
Well, there was some controversy in getting the language into a form. I can't remember the vote, but there was getting the language into a form that didn't feel like it was imbalanced in terms of the groups that normally contribute money to the parties on two sides, to each, the two parties respectively. So some of the early language was more directly critical of corporations relative to unions. So, right. The editing and sort of a negotiation process was just to make sure that this, didn't appear to be an imbalanced approach, but one that really tried to contain the amount of excessive spending that was beginning to happen on all sides.
Yeah, I would just say that's right. So often in this debate, the opening line is we've got to reduce the influence of corporations in our elections, and the dirty little secret, at least in Maine, is that the Democratic Party is actually much more successful at attracting national money to try to impact elections in Maine. That is the Republican Party. And yes, the corporations' influence is huge, but it is matched, at least in kind, by labor unions. And for every, again, Koch brothers contribution, you've got a Michael Bloomberg or a George Soros over here. So it's been a little bit of a struggle to have Republicans realize that the current system, if you will, is hurting our party, if you will, as much as it does the Democrats.
Well, I would just jump in and say, I won't. I just would add that the national money coming in that Roger's referring to, as a Democrat on the Democratic side, is certainly not only union money. I mean, it's certainly more union money than on the Republican side, but it's also a lot of corporate money on both sides, and not even just corporations, but individuals, associations, others. But I would just like to make one more point, which is a little bit on a tangent, but I think it's relevant here, about what's happened since this resolution came up in the legislature. And that is the explosion of the internet and online advertising and data harvesting and manipulation in manipulating our public dialogue. And I think that is related to the issue of money in politics, because a lot of this is generated by players in the political world, and they use these tools to influence people, and not just their commercial behavior, but their political behavior. And there's a growing body of scholarship on this, and it's not really just the Russians' interference or anything like that. It's the whole system of social media and other platforms that concerns me a great deal, and is crying out for regulation. And I'm not at all sure how that can be regulated if there's a strong, argument that decisions like Citizens United apply in that space. So that's an important growing consideration.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, John. I think we have time for one more question before we'll have some questions from the audience. And that is, do you see Maine as uniquely positioned to lead in the national effort to pass this amendment, given the reaction to the recent Senate race and the state's history of pursuing bipartisan solutions to tough problems? Roger?
Yeah, I do. For a number of reasons. I mean, we have, I think, a long history, or at least a recent history, of passing what I'll call good democracy initiatives in the state of Maine, thanks in large part to my two colleagues here on the panel. I mean, ranked choice voting, we were the first in the nation. I'll defer to John on this, but clean elections, we were one of the first, if not the first. So we have a strain of pro-democracy with a small d initiatives in the state of Maine. And it's a doable thing. I mean, we have 3 of our 4 congressional delegates who are already on board on this. Senator Collins has been a leader in campaign reform initiatives generally, not specifically this one. So hopefully she can be convinced, but the population as a whole, and maybe you can comment on this, Amy, I know there's been some polling, but Maine citizens are strongly behind this kind of constitutional amendment, so that the next time we have a Senate race, there'll be a debate between candidates and not drowned out by national money. So I think we are uniquely set up to be a leader in this.
Yes, you're right, Roger. I don't remember the exact statistic, and maybe Azar could look it up for us, but it's over 70%. And I'm sure of that. Dick or John?
Loved Roger's answer. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Rapid fire. Great. Well, we can take some questions from the audience right now. And the American Promise Political Director, Azar Cole, is with us tonight. And he's been taking a look at the questions coming in through the question and answer and chat buttons on Zoom. So Azar, what do you have for us?
Great, thank you, Amy, and to all of our speakers. And the questions are coming in. I'm trying to answer some of them just by typing out responses, and we'll get to some live. I want to start with sort of piggybacking on a question from Henry Laughlin, a chapter member in Maine. And Amy, to your point, it's 73% of Mainers, with majorities of each party, Democrat, Republican, and Independents, support this constitutional amendment to allow for reasonable limits on money spent in politics. And Henry's question wonders, is there this sense of frustration and exasperation among elected officials? I want to slightly adapt that and ask, what gives us hope that we can make progress on this? I don't think anyone's disillusioned that the challenge is quite daunting. And most everyone's frustrated by this system that's not working. There's a ton of things that make me very optimistic for the future that I'm seeing in this work every day. But Amy, I'm wondering if we could start with you actually, just asking what gives you hope of why this is something we can make progress on in a meaningful way.
Well, I think specific to Maine, part of the hope is in the statistic that you just mentioned. And if 73% of Mainers do agree on really anything, because it seems like in politics these days, so many things are, 50-50 or 49-51. But with 73% of Mainers agreeing that this is an issue, I think that in particular gives me hope that there's a groundswell of support that is not likely to go away. People were just, disgusted by what happened in the US Senate race with the, constant barrage of negative commercials and mailers and everything. That is something that has definitely given people, reason to think that the system's broken and it needs to be fixed. So Jane and I and other chapter members have found that when we reach out to folks, we, only have to speak with people for a minute or less before they're saying, oh yes, sign me up. Where do I, what petition can I sign? How can I help out? Because they feel like their voice is being drowned out by all this money pouring in, and they definitely want to see that addressed.
Yeah, I think the more you talk to people about this issue, the more optimistic it's easy to be, because people really agree on this. And I want to get to David Gulick's question. He was struck, Dick, by your description of camaraderie with your colleagues from opposing parties. And I'm on a lot of calls like this, and it's rare where there's a Republican, an independent, and a Democrat on the same call saying the same thing, that we need big foundational change. And Dick, I'm wondering if you can talk to the fact, is this normal on a lot of issues where you're talking with members of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and you yourself are an independent, or is this something that's really worth noting to think through the opportunity here with this issue in particular?
I'm really trying to figure this out, because certainly when I served, and I served 5 different legislatures, and almost to the person, I liked the people, I liked working with them. We could talk about things. The notion of a legislator who is a statesperson, who is trying to do good for the world, and just people have different ideas of how to do it, but we talk it through, right? So I that gives me a very sort of positive feeling about people who get into politics. And what better thing to be than be in a room with a bunch of people who want to make the world a better place? That's a wonderful thing. And somehow our system has gotten, and I think it's something to do with just the party structures and the power struggles that happen because of party structures. So these same politicians who sort of on the one hand are, everybody seems like a really good person, are also caught in this system where political power is the end game. And what gives me, so what gives me hope is, good people engaged. What, worries me is so much of the existing political structure and establishment benefits in some way from the way things are happening right now. All this huge amount of spending is in some ways a full employment program, right? For political party establishment people. And so I don't know, I'm hopeful we get past it. I've loved the camaraderie aspects of the job. When I look at Washington, it sure doesn't look like many people maybe feel that there. I don't know. those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah, there's no simple answers to any of this. And Roger, I think one of the first things you said in this conversation really struck a couple of people about not having control over all of the messages that were going to be put out on your behalf, maybe not directly coordinating with you, but certainly in favor of your campaign or in opposition to your opponent's campaign. Can you speak a little bit more to if we were successful in winning this constitutional amendment, and I won't say if, but I'll say when we're successful in winning this constitutional amendment to allow for stronger limits on money spent in elections and stronger limits on independent expenditures in particular, how would that change American politics? Drawing on your experience from the inside and from the outside as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything Dick just said about how the party system works a little bit against all this. I think the answer to your question is that things would work a little bit more like the Augusta City Council did when I was mayor. There were 8 city councilors and me, and we were not elected on a partisan basis. So honestly, I think there were 3 of the city councils I served with. I don't even know what party they were. And there were a lot of 5-4 votes, don't get me wrong, but they weren't always the same 5 against the same 4. There were 2 here, or 3 there. It changed. And that's because people didn't go to their corners, if you will, because they were members of a particular party. And that's always going to be true. We're going to have a party structure, and I'm not arguing against that in the legislature. You need to organize 186 people. You can't have 186 free agents out there, so to speak. But I think that what big money does is it works against that kind of collegiality that Dick was just talking about. Because I think what is true is that if you look at where the money comes from, it tends to drive the Republican Party to the right, and it tends to drive the Democratic Party to the left, just because of where the money is coming from. And there's not that much money to overgeneralize, not that much money directed to the center. So you tend to have people subconsciously, if not more, taking up the causes of the folks who help get them elected. And it is a little bit of a wedge. And I'll use Dick Woodbury as an example. I mean, Dick was literally an independent. He was the only independent in the Senate. Dick was not getting money from the far right. He was not getting money from the far left. And to a certain extent, he was, I think, unburdened by that reality and just able to be a centrist in the best sense of the word. So I think one aspect of getting rid of big money in politics will be it'll bring things a little bit more to the center, which is how things get done.
And fantastic. And I think we have time for one more quick question before I want to turn it over to Jane to share about how to get involved. And Roger, I'll quickly pose this one to you as well. It's from Edie Smith in Senator King's office, who's a real champion for this work in the Senate. And she asks, the increase of money in politics, especially dark money, has paralleled the rise of false news and lies becoming truth without any substantiation. And the question is, do you think these 2 issues need to be tackled at the same time? Or, and I'm editorializing here, is there any connection between this rise in disinformation and our inability to meaningfully limit money spent in elections from unchecked sources?
That's a great question, Edie, and I haven't thought much about that. I'm going to defer to my colleagues on that, but I will say one thing that, we're always talking about making more demands on our school day for kids. We need to have financial literacy. We need to have more health education. I think one of the things we really ought to be thinking about collectively is a curriculum which educates people on how to be intelligent news consumers, because this is becoming such a huge problem. But the relationship between that and big money, I'll defer to Dick and John on that.
Yeah, I would just say this is our democracy is at a point where it's under great stress and strain. And two of the things that are essential for making democracy work are that people feel like they can make a difference, and they can feel like that there's value in getting engaged, and people being informed. And both of those are like two key parts of a well-functioning democracy, and not being subject to misinformation. And in this respect, I go back to the earlier question about what gives you hope. I do think that there's a generation of folks who are being exposed to a lot of misinformation and being exposed to a lot of social media, but are also rejecting some of the frameworks and some of the assumptions that an older generation has been attached to, and they're open to doing things differently and different possibilities, and they're not willing to accept this kind of perennial logjam that we have on the issue of money and politics. I think they're willing to do something.
Both issues super important to address. I can't easily prioritize one, and so nothing to add. But
my hypothesis is if we can solve our money problem, a lot of positive things are going to slide into place. And so I'm excited to bring Jane into the conversation to really share, well, quite simply, what can we do about this? And excitingly, what's already been done about this. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, so I just want to start by saying thanks to everyone who is on the call for joining us this evening. And special thanks again to Roger and Dick and John for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with all of us. And also a huge thank you to Aiden for starting us off with such an inspiring explanation about why we're doing this. It's so important, as Amy said, to have some people a little bit younger involved in this work, and we really appreciate your input. So to sum up, we are a group of Mainers from across the political spectrum who agree that unlimited money in politics is harmful to our democracy. We have a clear goal: to make sure Maine is ready to ratify a constitutional amendment that would allow reasonable limits on campaign spending. Practically speaking, that means persuading all of our legislators, state and federal, to support this amendment. To make that happen, we're working hard to build our network of Mainers, Maine businesses, and Maine-based nonprofits and civic organizations to show our elected leaders that Mainers stand together on this critical issue. To say clearly, we never want to have a repeat of last year's Senate race. We are done with wealthy donors dangling carrots, to borrow a phrase from Aiden, in front of our candidates and drowning out our voices. So we welcome all of you to get involved. And here are 3 specific ways that you can help out. First, you can become a member of our chapter of American Promise. We meet twice a month for an hour, and we would love to have more members, so feel free to drop in and check us out. To sign up, you can email Amy at acartmel@kw.com, and perhaps one of you other panelists could put that in the chat box if anyone has a minute. Also, secondly, if you haven't already, you can go to the Stand With Maine website and sign our petition. It's right on the front page. And then you can share it with friends, family, and colleagues. And I was really glad to hear that some people who had received our email had already shared information with others. So thank you for that to anyone who was a part of that effort. And third, you can reach out to business, nonprofit, and civic leaders who you know. You can share why you feel this work is important, and you can ask them to consider endorsing Stand With Maine on behalf of their organization. So finally, feel free to reach out to Amy and to me if you have questions or would like more information. You can also check out the Stand With Maine resources page to see what we've been up to. Calls like this have been recorded, and there are several of them in the resources page, and other information as well. If you're really on fire about this and that's not enough, you can check out the American Promise resources page, where you'll find lots of information about this issue in general, and also more about our national work. So that is it from me for tonight. And again, thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you to all of the panelists. We really appreciate everything that you brought this evening. I hope it was interesting and informative for everyone, and would love to have anyone participate. So definitely email me if you'd like any more information. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thanks
night.
all.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.